This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes and powering our vehicles to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. In addition to recording this podcast, I also write newspaper columns, and this Christmas season, you can give the gift of news and get a special deal subscribing to the publications I publish in. That's the Fargo Forum, Grand Forks Herald, Jamestown Sun, one low price, you get them all. Gift the news, call Santa's hotline at 800-274-5445 and give an annual news subscription for 50% off this holiday season. It's the perfect gift to keep anyone on your list informed. Simply call 800-274-5445 to give the gift of news. Welcome to Plain Talk. This is Rob Port, your host, of course. In a moment, going to be speaking to a man who has served the state of North Dakota since 1976. That's Attorney General Wayne Stenehjem, who announced last week, by the time you're listening to this, has announced that he will not be seeking another term in his office. But before we get to that, of course, as I always do, I want to thank everybody for listening to the podcast. Really appreciate everybody who takes the time to click through and listen. If you would think about it, subscribe to the podcast if you're not already through one of your favorite podcasting platforms. And of course, if you're using a platform that allows you to review the podcast, if you'd leave an honest review, well, that would be great. So let's get straight into the interview. Attorney General Stenehjem served in the North Dakota House of Representatives from 1976 to 1980, served in the state Senate from 1980 to 2000, and has served as North Dakota's Attorney General from 2000 until present. His current term will be up in December of 2022. So he's got a year out, and I'm sure there's going to be a race forming very quickly for people who would like to hold that position now. But until then, Mr. Stenehjem is still our Attorney General. And first of all, what brought you to the decision? I know you struggled with it a little bit because I had asked you a couple times. It wasn't, are you going to make an announcement? Do you know what you're doing next year? You had told me at one point maybe you'd announce around Thanksgiving. That came and went. I know you struggled with it a little bit. What describe that struggle for us?
It really was a considerable struggle. And first I want to say, though, that when you in life come to a fork in the road and you look at either path that you can take and you realize that either one of those paths is a good one, you're a lucky person. And that's where I was, because I really enjoy doing this job. The people that I work with in this office are dedicated, professional civil servants, and I feel too that I owe a lot to them. But the work is important and it's very enjoyable. On the other hand, the other path is that I recognize I'm 68 years old. I'm in great health. My wife retired last year, and she said, she was pushing for me to retire. And she said she wants to spend more time with us together. That's a good thing when you hear that from your spouse. And so I'm very lucky for that. And so that's where I was struggling. And it really was a very difficult decision. I went back and forth. I thought I could run again. I could run perhaps and serve just 2 years after being elected. But for me, I think that when you run for an office, unless some super intervening cause arises, you owe it to complete the term you got elected for. And so I didn't want to do that. 4 years, in 4 years, I'll be 74. And, being in good health and loving to travel like we do is something that's very appealing as well. And so ultimately just made the decision that I won't run again. And it was a tough one. It is a tough one because I really do like the job. It's an important job, and we have a great office here. When I came into the office, Heidi Heidkamp, of course, was my predecessor, and I talked to her, and she said, I am leaving for you an outstanding office of professionals who come to work on behalf of the citizens of North Dakota every day. And she did. And now I think that I can honestly say that I have gone even one better, that the staff is better trained and ready for whoever my successor might be.
let's go back to 1976. What drew you into public service in the first place?
So I've been kind of interested in the political process all of my life. My family has been extremely involved.
I was going to say it was the family bit. Your brother Bob Stenehjem was Senate Majority Leader.
He was. He came in the legislature, of course, after I was. I also have a younger brother, Alan, who served in the House of Representatives for several terms. There was a time when there were the three brothers of us all serving in the legislative assembly simultaneously, and I think that's a record around the country that never happened before. And so that was just great. But in 1976, I was in my third year of law school, and so what happened at the time is that the federal court had taken up a job the legislature wasn't able to do, and that's to reapportion the state. Grand Forks County, where I lived, had one legislative district, and it elected 4 senators and 8 representatives, and the court said you can't do that. You have to divide them up into single legislative districts. And what happened was the district that I represented, which was District 42, the University of North Dakota area, a number of people said, maybe it's time to put a student into the legislative assembly to represent us. And so I ran, and I was successful. Ran again in 76 for the House, and then in 1980 ran for the Senate. All from that district.
During your time in the legislature, what's your proudest accomplishment? What do you feel like you got done there in that time?
So and this is probably little known, but at the time back in the mid 70s, North Dakota courts were all a conglomeration of different courts. We had county justice courts, county courts with increased jurisdiction, and district courts, and of course municipal courts. And for the county courts, they were not even required to be attorneys, and they could hear cases. So we went through a process, a very difficult and controversial one, to unify the court system, to have a single level of trial courts, that's the district courts, funded by the states, and require that the judges be licensed attorneys, and so they're trained in the law. That took a couple of sessions to get it through, but finally we were able to accomplish it, and now we have this system that we have that is much more, I think, serves justice much better than the conglomeration we had before. And so that is a major change in the judicial system in North Dakota. But also I served on the Judiciary Committee, and that's what I thought made me want to run for this office, because a lot of the legislation that affects what we do here in this office is relates to legislation that I worked on when I was in the legislature. Chief among them, or tops among them, is our open meeting and open records law. I think we have the most robust open.
I wanted to talk because that's how by the time I started my writing career, you were already Attorney General. I started a few years after you started in that office, and that's my most frequent interaction with your office is open records. Hopefully, I try not to reach your office. Hopefully, I could get the records before we get there. That's always my goal. But your office enforces essentially the open records laws. But you also had a hand in developing our laws as they stand today in the legislature.
Yes, that's exactly right. And Heidi Heitkamp was then Attorney General. She had a blue ribbon panel, and they drafted this statute. She came to me and asked if I'd be the prime sponsor of the bill, which I did. We made, of course, some tweaks to it, but we got it passed, and it is unique in that it allows any citizen to make a complaint about a violation of a access to a meeting or a record that they're entitled to that they haven't gotten. No charge, and I'm not aware that any other state in the country does this kind of thing. We review those and then issue our opinion. You, Rob, yes, you are right. You are one of our frequent flyers, we call you. And good for you. We appreciate that. And you're absolutely right. We really do try to resolve these things with the political subdivisions before they require us to go through that extraordinary process of actually writing an opinion. And so it's one of the critical parts of it is that we have citizens who are willing to step up, and you have done that on numerous occasions. Others do. Some of the major news outlets in the state have been regular correspondence on this, but so are regular citizens. Ordinary citizens will ask for a record, and it might take weeks or months even sometimes before they get it. We will call them out on it and issue an opinion accordingly.
Do you the other thing I like about our open records laws is the presumption that everything's a public record, unless we've written a specific statute to say, well, here's the reasons why this particular record or these sorts of records shouldn't be in the public sphere. Which I like. I mean, it's and it also the law. If for anybody using North Dakota's open records laws, I mean, those are the two things to remember. One, everything is a record unless there's a specific exemption. And two, if they deny your request for a record or they deny you access, they have to cite the law that allows them to do that. Though
that's exactly right. They have to say if we're denying it, saying here is the statute that says that it is not an open record. And I get a lot of complaints from the local governments. Saying, well, this should not be an open record. And I say, well, that is fine. Go to the legislature and get yourself an exemption if you think you can get one passed. And let me say this, too. We do 2-3 dozen of these opinion acting on complaints per year. So not a whole lot when you consider that in any given week, there are hundreds of township, county, city, other government entities that are meeting all around the state of North Dakota. And I think more than ever before, they get it. And that's why when we meet, when the North Dakota Association of Counties meets, the League of Cities, the townships officers meet, we do training for them and tell them, and I think they know they are not going to get a pass if they fail to follow what the law requires. One time we went to a banquet for the Association of Counties, and one of the county officials came up to my wife and said, I think your husband has just gone way too far on these open records things. And Beth said, oh, tell me about it. I get home and my diary is an open record. And that shut that down. To be clear, she doesn't really have a diary.
Yeah, no, I get the joke. It's a good one. All right, so as Attorney General, you came into office in 2000, same year that former Governor John Hoeven was elected. Your approach to that, I mean, that office wears a lot of different hats. I mean, you have a hand in, obviously, law enforcement. You have a hand in the civil area of law, obviously, when the state of North Dakota gets sued, or maybe we're suing somebody else. But you also have a hand in a lot of the regulatory functions of state government, such as the State Industrial Commission, which is, regulates, among other things, North Dakota's oil and gas development. So what's it like? I mean, how has that office changed, if at all, since you took it over?
Well, it's changed a lot over the last 21 years since I got here. You outlined some of the important functions, but when I arrived, we did not have a North Dakota crime lab. There were a couple of folks who did drug analysis over in the health department's lab, but that was about it. As DNA and other scientific advances came upon us, I felt that it was important that North Dakota have a crime lab where we can analyze.
Late in the game for like DNA. I mean, DNA was going pretty strong.
I mean, it was it was just at the forefront back then. But there's other criminal analysis that we do. There's fire, fabric, and tire prints, and all of those, and fingerprints too. And I thought that it was important we have a crime lab, and so I went to the legislature and said we need to have a crime lab. I want some top scientists, and we have, I think, about 18 people who work there now in the crime lab, and they perform a very, very important function every week. I get a report on the number of hits in DNA and other analysis that they're doing that can do one or two things. It can help to solidify the conviction of people who are guilty of offenses, especially more serious ones like aggravated assaults, homicides, and sex crimes. And at the same time, too, it can exonerate people who are not guilty of anything, and that can be just as useful to make sure that people who are being prosecuted are actually proper targets for prosecution. We also have increased the number of agents that we have at our Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and we head up the narcotics task forces around the state, but also they are, I think, regarded now as the premier investigative agency in the state of North Dakota. Law enforcement regularly comes to the BCI for assistance on investigating criminal activity around the state, be it drugs or every homicide and all of the serious cases. And they're better trained and better equipped than they ever have been before. I'm very proud to be able to be associated. Under the statute, I'm the superintendent of the Bureau of Criminal Investigation. And the folks who work there are dedicated people who come to work every day trying to make North Dakota the safest place in the country.
Do you feel like anything with your office? I mean, you've opted to take a well-earned retirement, but the work of state government never changes. Things are always evolving. There's always another election. There's always another legislative session. Our societies, our state's needs changes. Is there anything about your office that you feel needs to change or evolve with the times?
Well, things will evolve. I don't, if there are things that I had thought should evolve, we probably would be working on having done that. What is unique here is that, I came here and I have known people, hired people who have met one another, they get married, they've had kids, and now they're in college. And so, for all but 2 or 3 people in this office of our 253 employees, for all but 2 or 3 of them, I'm the only boss in this office they've ever known. And, people like continuity. They want to know what the certainty is. And in the old days, attorneys general served 4 or 8 years, and that was it. And so this is now a little bit different. And some of them worry a little bit about what the next phase will bring. And I feel that I owe something to them to make sure that there's continuity and that we're doing things as we should be.
Do you you took a shot running for governor in 2016, and didn't work out as expected, as sometimes, right? I mean, what's the saying in baseball? That's why we play the games, right? You sit down and you analyze the stats, but sometimes it just doesn't go the way you think it's going to go. Describe that. I mean, your decision to run for governor.
You're absolutely right, and I will tell you that sometimes God, or in this case, the voters have other plans than what you have, and I certainly respect that. I will say this too, though, that now our governor and our attorney general don't run in the same cycle. So I didn't have to give up this office if I wanted to run for governor. I thought it was worth a shot and that I had something to offer for the citizens. The voters decided otherwise, but I would not have run for governor if I'd had to give up this job.
Well, it kind of seemed like the voters said they wanted you to keep that job because subsequently...
Yeah, well, one could argue that, and I think Governor Burgum actually said that during the campaign.
Yeah,
and so
subsequently
I'm willing to accept that.
Yeah.
And I'll say this too, that I talked to the governor before I made my announcement, and I told him, look, I know we have been rivals in the past, but I think it's fair to say we have been allies on much more over the course of the last 5 years or so than otherwise. And one of my favorite historical books is Team of Rivals, that probably everybody knows about, the cabinet that Abraham Lincoln put together. And I think that's an important lesson. I mean, I'm no Abraham Lincoln, but it was an important lesson that people should be working together. I don't think that the citizens of North Dakota want state government to be like Washington, where everything is frozen and it is so partisan that nothing can get done. People expect people who are elected to get the job done. And so, of course, I serve with the governor on the Industrial Commission, the Land Board, and other functions. And I can't think of a case where there's been a vote that was not unanimous over the time that we've been together. And we're kind of we want to head in the same way. Use our Bank of North Dakota, our state mill, our housing finance authority, all of those things for the betterment of our citizens.
That's a book by Doris Kearns Goodwin. Excellent book. And,
it is.
I think that thought. I mean, it's that I think sometimes you think of, well, the Republicans, they ought to be on the same team or whatever, forgetting how valuable. I don't want to say friction's maybe the wrong word for it, but competition, competing ideas, the debate, the argument is important. I think for ultimately developing good policies. I mean, if everybody's just rubber stamping what everybody else is doing, I'm not sure we're going to be governed well.
Well, that's the brilliance of the system that we have, a system of checks and balances and carefully prescribed authority for the different branches of government. And our whole system was intended that there would be a friction, that there would be, that the legislative branch would try to encroach on the executive and vice versa, and expected that the officials in those agencies would stand up for their own authority. That is a brilliant plan, and it works well, and there is nothing wrong. with professional civil disagreement, discourse, discussion, even heated arguments. But I don't think at the same time that people want things to grind to a halt because nobody can actually get anything done. But I agree with your initial point and understand that our system was designed with the idea that there would be friction and that there would be a pull and a tug between the different branches of government, and that each branch would be jealous of its own authority and proceed accordingly.
Let's talk just a little bit about what comes next. As I know you want to get out the door, you want to go lay wreaths at the cemetery for veterans, which is just a wonderful tradition.
It is.
We're gonna see a race to replace. I'm sure the Democrats will come up with a candidate. Republicans will probably come up with a couple. The one name that I'm hearing around a lot right now is Drew Wrigley. He hasn't announced anything official yet. That'll be on him. I imagine we'll hear something from him in the coming weeks. But Drew Wrigley, I mean, a couple of stints as U.S. attorney. If he were to somebody to throw his hat in the ring, what would you think about that?
Well, he would be someone who would easily fit in with the things that I do here: drug enforcement, prosecution of sex offenses, consumer protection, those kinds of things. He was U.S. attorney, of course, and when I was here, and we worked together on a number of federal, state, investigative cases on drugs, international cartels that are bringing illicit materials into North Dakota, fentanyl, heroin, all of those, pseudoephedrine, all of those things. So we have a history of having worked closely together. And so as far as continuity of the office, I think he's somebody who would offer just that.
One last question: for whoever ends up taking over this office after the election in November next year, what's your advice to them? What's your message to them?
So my message for them is hire the best people you can and let them do their job. One of the finest attributes that you can get from law enforcement is to have them say, "He always had our back." And that is the case with the people that work here. I always try to have their back. If they really screw up, of course, they're going to have to come in and we're going to have a conversation. But by and large, you hire the professionals, you let them do their job, you give them the tools that they need to do it, you give them guidance where it is necessary, and you respect the work that they do. And that has worked for me very well. There is to be honest, serving in public office, particularly this one, there's a lot of stress. And it really helps when you have a good dedicated staff and you can spread it around and share the stress, and it makes life much more easy, makes it much more worthwhile to come to work every day. I've been doing this for 21 years, and that's a long time. But sometimes I drive up into the Capitol parking lot, and I get the feeling that I just got here. And that's a good thing, to recognize that every day is fresh, and every day will bring new challenges and very interesting things to do.
Can I know I said that was the last question, but I always heard this rumor at the Capitol, and it always made me laugh every time I heard it. Your brother Bob Stenehjem, majority leader, unfortunately passed away while in office several years ago. But I heard that he used to play a joke on you during the legislative session, and he'd come and park in your parking spot at the Capitol. Is that true?
He did that once, and then he realized I have 42 agents in the Bureau of Criminal Investigation ready to haul his car away anytime. I'll tell you what, working with Bob was a great thing. And people always thought we were conspiring. We never did. But he would come down here and say, I just had to get away from the turmoil down the hall in the legislature. And then we'd talk about fishing or family or what have you. And a lot of people thought, well, Bob would just do whatever it is that you wanted him to do in the legislature. And the fact of the matter is, he would come in and say, I can't give you any special treatment because I'm the leader, and so I'm just going to back off. And I'd say, Bob, I'm not asking for special treatment. I only want you to treat me as well as you would have treated my opponent if he had beat me in the election.
I don't know. My experience with siblings is I'm probably going to get less favors with my siblings.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right.
Well, Wayne, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
You are most welcome. Happy New Year and happy holidays.
Well, you will have just heard an interview with Attorney General Wayne Stenehjem that I actually recorded over the weekend and going to be publishing this Monday. Of course, he's stepping down after more than 40 years serving the state of North Dakota between the legislature and, of course, his tenure as Attorney General. And Julie, I know you're somebody who's worked alongside Wayne on the campaign trail, worked alongside him in the executive branch. Any thoughts on him stepping down?
Well, Wayne has been just an outstanding public servant, all in all. He has been super fun to work with, and he's been involved in so many important cases. I think about how many times he's taken on national issues and challenged things that the federal government has put for the waters of the U.S. He's defending Dakota Access, the permit. He's just been in the throes of our state's policies for many decades. He's a good thinker. He is a fun person to be around. He's very witty and smart. So he's fun to work with. And he just engenders just a lot of goodwill. So I'm personally going to miss Wayne. And I think North Dakota citizens are going to miss Wayne. So I wish him all the best in his retirement. He and Beth have lots of travels that they want to embark on. And he's always loved that. And it makes him, it's part of what makes him such an interesting person, is his curiosity and desire to be out there in the world. And we're going to miss him in state government a lot. And I just wish him all the best and thank him for his service.
Well, we're going to move on. The conversation I wanted to have on our Public Service Commissioner, Julie Fedorchak, about is ethics. And this has really been a long-standing debate in North Dakota, even before we had the ethics ballot measure, which ultimately passed. It was backed by a local group, and I think it's hard to argue against that measure as policy because it's ethics, right? Who's against ethics? But there's ways, how are we defining ethics? It's not as easy, and I think sometimes that this amendment that we've added to our Constitution does some things that people don't necessarily realize that it does, or says some things, or maybe is based on some philosophies that I think, once explained and discussed, maybe a lot of the public are going to find objectionable. But the argument, and we saw this because there was a lawsuit filed against two of Commissioner Fedorchak's predecessors, and I guess one contemporary on the Public Service Commission, Brian Kalk and Kevin Kramer. There was a lawsuit filed by some sort of environmental interest groups, and they suggested that because these people took contributions from citizens who work in the coal industry. Now, I want to make that very clear because under North Dakota law, corporations can't make political contributions, but individuals can. And so you had individuals who work in the coal industry in different capacities, everybody from executives down to just coal miners, had donated money to the Public Service Commission. Well, the Public Service Commission also has a hand in regulating surface mining in the state of North Dakota. So the argument was that these public officials had essentially taken what the plaintiffs in that lawsuit described as bribes by accepting campaign contributions from people who work in an industry that they regulate. That was the argument. Now, I thought that this was a completely facetious argument. I wrote about it expansively at the time because I think every American, we're all governed by the people that we elect. And the people that we elect, whether it's a lawmaker or a governor or an ag commissioner or a public service commissioner, are going to make policies that intersect with our interests and our bottom lines. I mean, sometimes directly. Like if you work in the oil industry, the governor sits on the industrial commission and regulates your industry. So does the attorney general. So does the agriculture commissioner. You're an American. If you work in the oil industry, you have a right to, influence the election of those people. But there's an argument that's going on in North Dakota, and we're seeing it now. We've passed the the Ethics Amendment, which in turn created the Ethics Commission, and now you're seeing the people who push the Ethics Amendment arguing that the commission is not behaving ethically. And one of the reasons why is they want the Ethics Commission to ban political contributions from people who work in industries that are regulated by something like the PSC because they are supposedly unethical. And superficially, I'm afraid a lot of people are going to hear that argument and say, oh, well, that's right, that is unethical. You shouldn't take money from people you're regulating. And I wanted to talk about that with an actual person who sits on the Public Service Commission. Or Julie, First of all, did I lay out that debate correctly? I mean, would you correct me in any way? That's kind of the debate as I see it, I guess.
Absolutely. I think you did lay it out correctly. The only point that I would make that it differs from you a little bit is that the way you expressed it, that, you know, that these folks are saying we shouldn't take donations from the people who work in the industries we regulate, that isn't actually how they're characterizing it. They're very explicitly characterizing it as we shouldn't take donations from the businesses and that we regulate. And we don't. So, you know, when I think, and why I think that's important is if they did specify we shouldn't take donations from the people who work in the industries we regulate, I think North Dakotans could think through that a little bit better. But when they express it in a way like we shouldn't take donations from the businesses we regulate, then that seems like the businesses, the corporations are giving us money from their coffers. And that is not what's happening. Obviously, that's already prohibited by law. And so they're arguing something that isn't happening and using that to get people fired up about something that that seems wrong. And I think the state law has already decided that is wrong and has prohibited it. So that's where I really take an issue with this organization, that they are arguing that we shouldn't take donations from the corporations that we regulate, and we don't.
And to be so, the organization we're talking about, and it's a little hard. It's North Dakotans for Public Integrity, but they've also kind of got, and it's a lot of the same personnel, and it's a little hard to understand. But also North Dakota Voters First, I think, is another iteration. They were pushing some big changes to the way we hold elections in North Dakota. In the last cycle, they had a ballot measure. It was kept off the ballot by the state Supreme Court because of some circulation issues, but that's the group of people that we're talking about, and let's just get right to the heart of it. Why isn't it unethical to take contributions from a coal executive when you're regulating the coal industry?
Well, in the U.S. Supreme Court has looked at this very issue and sided in the favor of allowing the donations, and I think for several reasons. First of all, political donations are considered under federal law and state law free speech. And this is how we express ourselves in America, in a democracy. We are allowed to be able to donate money that we earn on our own, by our own efforts, to support candidates that we think are in line with what we want, how we want to be governed. That's a democracy. So I think that, you know, that's number one. Number two, which I think is also important for people to consider, is all of these donations are reported on and available for people to see on the Secretary of State website. Every year we have to give a report of where we got money, who gave it to us. Anything $200 or more is reported on our annual reporting forms and made available on the website for any citizen to evaluate. And so it's first of all, it's free speech. Second of all, it's already regulated and reported. And so I think those two issues, or those two reasons, are the biggest advocacies for allowing these kinds of donations. The third thing that I will say, and this is where I think it gets kind of unmanageable to suggest that we're going to bar people who work in the industries we regulate from donating to campaigns. I think it would be difficult to identify an industry that isn't regulated in some way, shape, or form by somebody in government, a lot of whom are ultimately led by somebody who's elected. So you've got, in the Public Service Commission, we regulate the coal industry. We also regulate all commercial scales and measuring devices. So anybody working for a company that has scales and measuring devices, we regulate. That includes every single Walmart, every single grocery store, every single gas station, every single grain elevator.
Everything from the scale at the meat counter at your butcher shop to the gas pump at the local Cenex or whatever.
Absolutely. And the Ag Commissioner, who, you know, Dina Butcher is one of the advocates for this group that we're talking about. She ran for Ag Commissioner. I'm curious to know if she took any donations from farmers, because the Ag Commissioner would be regulating farmers. They regulate the weed and fertilizer industry. They regulate the stocklands, the sales arenas, and now they regulate all the grains and elevators. And so that's an area there, where these agencies in North Dakota, a lot of whom are led by elected officials, are regulating industries that are, really embedded into our economy. I don't know how a person running for attorney general, governor, or the ag commissioner would begin to identify all the people who work in the oil and gas industry, which they regulate. How would you even go about doing that?
In a lot of cases,
I don't have, as a public service commissioner, I don't have a campaign staff. I do it myself. And so you get
also,
to the point
as a private citizen, I don't necessarily have to disclose to anybody what I'm invested in terms of, like, if I own, 49% of some company that operates out the oil patch, I'm a private citizen. I don't necessarily have to disclose that to anybody. And I can make donations to all sorts of politicians who are going to influence the oil industry in North Dakota. So how is it even enforceable? Now, when the ethics amendment passed, it became Article 14 of North Dakota's Constitution. And if you read the relevant text to our discussion right now, it's under Section 2, subsection 5. It says, I quote, "Directors, officers, commissioners, heads, or other executives of agencies shall avoid the appearance of bias and shall disqualify themselves in any quasi-judicial proceeding in which monetary or in-kind support related to that person's election to any office or financial interest not shared by the general public as defined by the Ethics Commission creates an appearance of bias to a reasonable person." Now, first of all, there's a lot of weasel words in that. I mean, who gets to stand in as the reasonable person? Is it me? Is it Donald Trump? Is it Dina Butcher? I mean, I don't know. Who is this person, this reasonable person that's going to speak for all of us in whether or not there's an appearance of impropriety? But the other problem I have with the way that this is created, and we haven't really touched on this, is that it creates sort of classes of donors. Whereas if I'm let's talk about it just in the context of the coal industry. If I'm in the business of coal mining and I want to mine coal and I want to build coal mines, this approach to quote unquote ethics restricts my ability to participate in the electoral process, because if I make contributions to people who regulate the coal industry, right, if I want to have a say in the elected officials who are then going to regulate my livelihood, we're putting restrictions on that. Like, either we can't accept them or they're considered unethical, or the person accepting them can't even make the decisions related to my industry that I want them to make. But the people who don't fall under any of those restrictions are the people who oppose building coal mines, right? Because it's not considered under this interpretation of what is and is not ethical. It's never unethical to donate to a politician who wants to block coal mines, but it is unethical for somebody who wants to mine coal to donate to a regulator who is also for mining coal. That's a double standard, and it ain't right.
Absolutely. And that's where I think the Supreme Court, why they decided how they did, is because you're talking about like Citizens United. Right. You're definitely going to be putting your hand on the scale in the favor of one group or another if you only allow certain types of organizations to give freely and then others can't. So I think that, anytime you're creating more barriers. You're creating more barriers to people, to free speech. You're creating more barriers for folks like myself and others who want to run for office by setting these standards in a way that are kind of difficult to meet. Like, why are we doing that? I mean, my big question to this group is, look at my donations. Tell me, are these unethical? Where have I been unethical? And what is the problem that's driving all of these new issues? Like, it's very difficult for them. I've talked to reporters who have interviewed them extensively, and they cannot point to a single specific problem that is driving the need for all these changes. And so I do not object to increased transparency. Quite honestly, I think some of the limitations on gifts and some of the increased reporting that has been required as a result of the some of these changes, that's good.
Sure.
I think that it was warranted, and it probably should have been embraced earlier by the legislature. And
I agree.
And maybe some of these other things wouldn't have happened then. So I think I would be willing to report every single gift from $1 or above. I mean, right now the threshold is $200. I'd be willing, because I track them all and I have the list of people 200 and below. I have all those. It's just they aren't required to report. Quite honestly, I hear a lot from people who don't want those reported. Like, they want a certain level of anonymity, so that they can, maybe they want to give to two candidates. Who knows why, but they get to decide. And it's not for me to judge, but it's not uncommon for people to give just under the threshold.
I mean, we have a secret ballot for a reason. I mean, sometimes people want to be private about they want to participate, but they want to be private. And I guess I understand that. And listen, as a professional muckraker, if you want to talk about like our transparency report, I don't understand why we can't have every single candidate for elected office in North Dakota. We live in a digital age. This is possible now. I don't think there's anything that's stopping us from saying you have to report every single penny you took in and every single penny you spent every week, and it's all going to be uploaded to a database, and everybody who wants to can go on there and look at every single penny. I would be for that, 100% for that. And then you can look at the way, once they're in office, you can look at the way they govern, and you could say, you know what, that person's too friendly to this industry. I want somebody who's going to be a little more skeptical. Like, you can make those decisions as a voter. But what I'm afraid of is that under the banner of quote unquote ethics, we are going to diminish the ability of Americans to participate in their system of government, and like it or not, because I understand a lot of people like, oh, money in politics, you know, it's very popular to bemoan that, but I don't know how other way to do it, right? What's the other way of doing it? Do you want the taxpayers to just fund every candidate? Some people are for that. Some people have pushed for that. I'm a little skeptical of doing that. But if we're gonna have an open process where people are free to use their money to express their political point of view by supporting a candidate or opposing a candidate or supporting an issue or opposing an issue, if we're going to have a free society, people are going to be allowed to do that. And the Supreme Court has upheld that. And so, like, I don't think that we could, honestly, there's a part of me that believes if there are parts of this section of the Constitution, Article 14, that could be struck down by the courts if they were ever challenged, if they were enforced, maybe the way the Ethics Commission wants to enforce them, because I don't think they're in keeping with the First Amendment. And maybe that's getting off into legal speculation that's a little beyond the bounds of our interview, but I think they would be. I think there'd be a good chance some of this could be challenged and struck down.
I don't disagree. You made a good point about, how are we going to fund these elections? Well, the truth is, the folks that are driving these changes are doing so because they're mad about the money and the influence in politics. The more you restrict people from donating, say, pooling their money through a PAC or donating and having to report it at every single level, or the more restrictions you create, the more you hand the power over to only the people who can afford to run on their own because they're rich. I mean, that's just what happens. And so you end up giving more influence and creating a barrier for entry into the political system for only people who are wealthy enough to fund the campaign themselves. And I mean, that is completely in the opposite direction that we want to be going. I do want to make one point. The Ethics Commission and the Ethics Commissioners, I want to tip my hat to them. I think they have gone about employing this measure and developing the rules in a very thoughtful and deliberate way. Maybe they can be more transparent. Maybe they can, learn something from us on how we hold public meetings and attend in person and allow people to ask questions. I mean, I'm not saying that some of those criticisms aren't warranted but those are
also
tweaks.
tough because it's a volunteer commission. So, I mean, it gets hard. Right. There's demands on time. We've all been living through this gosh darn pandemic that never ever goes away. But I to your point, I agree. And the one thing that worries me about that, because I do think our commissioners have overall done a pretty good job. I think they've exercised a lot of forbearance that I was afraid that they wouldn't.
Yeah.
But the thing that worries me is that these commissioners aren't always going to be the commissioners, and we shouldn't have to rely on their forbearance to protect our political process. There are some very deep flaws in what we have put in our state constitution. I think we're very lucky that we have some leadership at the Ethics Commission that has not chosen to go down some roads they could have. But we shouldn't have to rely on that forbearance. The law should be better, and that's what really worries me. And at the end of the day, honestly, I still believe we have more to gain from transparency than we do from restrictions. I am very against restrictions on political money. I am very for disclose it. Just disclose it all, and then we voters can figure out, how we feel about it. And just my last point too, every time we put one of these restrictions in place or a new rule or something, immediately people set about trying to find out ways to work around it. Every single time we've done it at the federal level. We haven't really done it so much at the state level. But like you look at like the McCain-Feingold campaign finance reform. Why do you think we have super PACs today? Right, because they essentially created it. That was the workaround. You're never gonna get money out of politics. So just disclose it all, and then rely on activists and journalists and everybody else to point out and say, hey, there's a problem here. This person is doing this, and they took this money, and isn't that untoward? And I guess the voters can decide for themselves. That's the system I would prefer. As imperfect as it would be, I think that's a lot better than restricting everything.
I 100% agree. Political donations are going to find their way into the process one way or another because politics matters, and we have choices, and those are all good things. And so we have to just, find the best way forward to give people faith in the government that people aren't being corrupted and that there isn't, bribery happening and all those sorts of things. I think on the Public Service Commission, we do make a lot of important decisions for industry, and people should be able to see who's donating to our campaigns, and they can. That information is available.
That's the thing. Like if you take a regulatory action, and I think that's kind of the bugaboo at the heart of all of this. Did you take a regulatory action because so-and-so contributed to your campaign? Or did so-and-so contribute to your campaign because they believed you had the sort of philosophy and stance on the policy issues that would lead you to make that decision?
Right.
It's difficult to parse those things out sometimes. I mean, sometimes it's very clear cut. Like some politician shows up with like bags of cash. Remember that congressman had like bags of cash in his freezer, right? Sometimes that happens, and we can all say, all right, that guy was taking bribes. But on the other hand, if you're somebody who generally says, I am for the development of oil and gas versus a candidate who says, no, we ought to keep all the oil and gas in the ground. Gosh, I wonder which side the oil industry is going to support. And is that person supporting oil and gas development because they took bribes or because they're just organic? That's just their position, and they're going to attract support from like-minded people. It's not an easy thing. Anyway, Julie, I used up all the time you allotted for me. I really appreciate you coming on. This debate's not going anywhere, but I hope people think a little bit past maybe some of the superficial money and politics, and think about how some of this stuff really works, because it's really, really important.
Agreed. Thank you, Rob, for your focus on this and for making these clear arguments on behalf of transparency and thoughtful approach to this issue. It is important for people to think through it because the consequences are significant.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.